I'm going to talk a little bit about the interactive resume project. You were told how to make the map appear. Essentially, you had to add this line to your resume.js, resumebuilder.js file to make the resume show up. And you also have to uncomment a bunch of lines in your helper.js. So essentially, all the lines here, you have to uncomment those lines. And if you did this, the map on your resume showed up via magic or not. We're going to talk a little bit about how this actually happens, what the code for showing your resume is like. And essentially, most of the code is in the helper.js file, the file that you downloaded. And there's one main function that sort of makes makes all of this happen. It's called initialize map, and this function is essentially called when your page loads. Initialize map is called. Essentially, once you uncomment this code over here, this is exactly what happens, like what calls it. And in fact, I have actually uncommented it in here, so you can see, in here, initialize map is called on load via this line over here, one of the lines that you had to uncomment. Roughly, what happens when this function is called is that the script collects all the locations from the objects that you had in your resume. So this happens in a helper function that's called location finder. And essentially, what this function does is it loops over your work and your places where you work and your education and your bio object, and it collects all the location data from those objects. And then it uses a Google Play search service to translate those street addresses into longitude and latitude, and then places that as pins on the map. So we can just scroll upwards to this function, because really inside this function, inside initialize map, that's where everything happens. And so essentially we define several helper functions inside this function and then call them in order to collect the information and to present it as pins on the map. So the first interesting line that we have here is this line over here. So map equals new Google Maps map document. And so what happens is that in here we create a new map object, and we are passing two arguments to create this map. This argument over here, the document query selector map, that's just a div inside, that's just a division inside your index.html file that the map should attach to. That's where the map should be displayed. And then map options is something that we define over here, and it just tells Google Maps which type of map we want to use and how we want to display it. And we can actually go to see the documentation. Right, so this is just a general, Google Maps webpage, and then has a lot of information. And here you can see about different map types that it has. And there's an example, and in here, for example, there's an example code of how to create a new map. So as you can see, we're calling new Google Maps map, and then attaching it to a certain element in our index.html file, and then giving it the map options. All right, so we're just like creating our new map here, but we're not doing anything with it. Now, first we need to collect all the locations from our resume, and this happens in this function over here, location finder. So what this does is it's a really actually very simple function, and there's nothing new in here, nothing that you haven't seen. Basically, we create an empty array, and then we enter the locations from the contacts in here as the first item, and then we loop over to education section and the work section, and each location that we find, we enter it in, and those locations are going to be probably street addresses or some sort of a string, and we would essentially want to translate those locations into longitude and latitude into the relevant object so that we can push them, so that we can make them into pins into the map. And so this, as you can see over here, so at the end, right? We call location is equals location finder, right? So we create this this like new, this is all happening inside the initialize map. So we create this new locations array that has all of our locations, and then we call pin poster with this locations array. So let's go and see what pin poster does. So what pin poster does, it actually uses an additional service, the places service, which is not strictly a part of Google Maps, but it is a related service. It's a service that you can use with Google Maps. And so essentially this is the service that's going to translate those locations into objects that we can add into the map. The first step that we need to do that would be to create this service, to initialize this service. So this happens in this line over here. If we want to see how the information on the places library, here it is, and so this essentially enables the application to search for places, and this is, to make it work, in addition to the line that I've shown you, you have to add this line over here in your index.html file. And in fact, if you remember in the instructions, you were told to uncomment one line in your index.html file, and this is the line that you were told to uncomment. So essentially, this is the line that loads this additional library. So as you can see, there are several different types of searches that you can perform using this library. You can do a nearby search, a text search, and a bunch of other things. The search that we're using in our helper, in helper.js, is a text search. So this is a search that essentially returns a list of nearby places based on a string. And this is exactly what we needed, because in our resumebuilder.js, we represented, the different locations, the different schools and the different places that you've worked as strings. So this is the appropriate thing to use. And so here's, a little more information of what you need, the different type of things that you need to provide in order to make your request work. But essentially, the basic things that you need is you need a request and you need a callback function. So basically, to do a search, you are going to type service.textSearch, and then you need to give two parameters, request and a callback. The request can contain a lot of things, but the basic thing that it has to contain would be a query. And the query item is just supposed to be the string of the location that you're going to be searching for. So as you can see here, we have a for loop. We loop over all the locations that we collected before, and we make a new request for each one of those. And with that location string, and then with this callback function. Now the callback function is essentially the function that is going to handle whatever text search returns. So you need to give that function as an input to text search. And so we have actually defined this callback function over here. So this is a function that takes two arguments, result and status. Both arguments are returned by text search. Status just tells you whether the service was able to return something meaningful. And then what results contains is an array of essentially longitude and latitudes, why an array? Because sometimes there's more than one match. So, but we're going to use the first one. Essentially, what this line that over here does, it tests whether the status which was returned was okay, whether we got like a valid result, and then if so, it calls another function that we have defined here, create map marker, with the first item of this array. And so essentially, create map marker takes one location that was returned from our text search, and it converts it into a pin on the map. So let's go look at create marker. All right, so this is our create map marker function, and it takes as an argument place data. And so essentially, as you can sort of like guess how the place data object looks like, right? Because we can access the latitude and the longitude, and it also has a formatted address. And so we can get all this from our place data. And then what we do is we create a new Google Maps marker. So the markers are something that Google Maps provides. So we can go again and look into our markers section. So here we have a little bit about markers. So essentially, very straightforward, a marker defines a location on the map. And there's a lot that you can do in terms of changing how the marker appears. So you can change the icon that you're gonna see. I mean, it has a default icon, but you can change that. You can attach an info window to it to display additional information, and you were actually asked to do this in one of the exercises in the JavaScript Basics class. There's a lot you can do, but essentially, so this is how you make a new marker, essentially called new Google Maps marker. It has a position, it has the map that it needs to attach to, and the text that's going to be part of the marker property. So as you can see, here we add this marker using our map. This is the location that we're taking from place data. And the title is just essentially the formatted address that place data returned. So, and as you can see over here, we are also attaching an info window. We are creating a new info window that is going to open when you click the marker. We can look a little bit about, we can see a little bit about info windows as well.
Yes, so let's take a step back a little bit, because there's been a lot of stuff that we're talking about. So basically, like, I want to ask you, when you were trying to figure this out yourself, like, your process was you were just stepping through each function one at a time, right?
Right, yes.
Right, so basically, if you think about like what Dimka did, guys, so just if you take a step back, she's already, like, just through her experience, she's already had a mental map, a strategy, a framework of how to look things up, and that's actually one of the key things that I like to point out, that this is how you will develop your strength as a developer, because most of the time, most developers, they don't know all the function calls.
And sometimes you have to work with like pieces of code that you're given, or previous projects or things that somebody worked on. You're gonna have to figure out what they did. If they're nice, they're gonna have, you're gonna have some comments that are gonna be helpful.
Right.
Sometimes you're not gonna have comments, or you're gonna have comments that are less helpful. So you're gonna have to kind of like figure out stuff.
Right. Yeah. So like that's the thing. Like, this is a common strategy like a lot of developers use, and I personally use this too. It's like if I basically step through the code, as soon as I look through, I look at things piecewise, function-wise, like a couple of lines at a time, and make sure that I'm stepping through, I'm understanding the logic and the flow of how this how this person did it. And then if I recognize the code that I really want to dive deep into, I need to then go in and do a search and look at the API documentation. And usually if it's a popular library, such as Google Maps, there will be a ton of documentation, and there will be a ton of discussions of people trying to figure out what does this documentation mean, how do you do it, how does this work. You could then do a lot of research and piece together how things get done.
And Google Maps is, I mean, they have a really good documentation in that they also have examples of how to use things, or like how to build basic things. So it's really helpful. For example, if you're trying to build something from scratch, it's really helpful. And if you're just trying to figure out why this piece of code works, then you can sort of like look at the different objects that are created, that are used, and like read up on those and see, okay, that's why they're calling this with this, as an argument, and that's why they have this as a callback function. Okay, now I got it.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's really not magic. It's just really knowing how to approach things, right?
It's doing a little bit of research.
Yeah.
If it's something that's routine and you've done this before, you've used this before, then probably less. But yeah, you can. And if you just wanna understand like a piece of code that somebody gave you that works. And this happens a lot. Like, for example, you're going to be searching on, say, Stack Overflow, how to do something, and you're going to find this piece of code, and that somebody posted and said, hey, if you want to do this, then use this piece of code. And you can just like copy and paste it, and it's going to work. But it's always a good idea to kind of like take the time to understand why it works as well. I mean, obviously the goal was to make it work, so now you made it work, but I think a greater goal would be to understand why it works, so that next time you can code it yourself.
That's actually really good advice. Thank you. called info window.
Yeah, and info window was something that you were actually asked to investigate a little bit in one of the quizzes.
Can you maximize your?
Okay, yeah, and so essentially, the way it works with Windows is that we add a pop-up window to this marker that's going to show up and can display more info. And then essentially, I'm actually going to minimize this back so that I can show you guys the documentation on info windows over here, right? So you can see essentially what a info window is. Usually displays a text or an image in a pop-up window above the map at a given location. It has, so basically it's just like a little window. To add a window, to open an info window, you essentially need to make a new one by calling new Google Maps info window, and then with a content string. And then you need to attach it to your marker. So essentially over here we see how to attach it to a marker using a click event. So essentially what this happens is that there's a listener that listens for whenever the marker is clicked, this info window is opened. So this is essentially how you add an info window, and this can also help you with the solution to the quiz.
That's great. Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks for showing us the walkthrough for just understanding how Google Maps works in the interactive resume. This is actually, we hope this will be useful for you because in, guess what, Project 5, you will have to implement your own Google Maps from scratch, from at the very beginning.
So you're going to have to be looking at that documentation a lot more.
Yeah. So it's good to start thinking about how things work behind the scenes. So it's going to help you later on in your Project 5 because then Project 5 is your neighborhood map project. And this is actually the project that we do not give you any code for. You're
on your own.
You're on your own. You're basically starting with a blank page, a blank slate. So, like for you people who are at this stage on Project 2, don't worry, we will build you up. So don't be scared. We're not trying to intimidate you or anything. We just want to let you know to paint you a nice picture of like what's going to happen and hopefully set good expectations so you'll be ready and you won't get surprised.